Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the External Partnerships Select Committee. Obviously, welcome members, but also visitors and guests today. I think probably the first thing to start with, Eddie, just to put you on the spot, is obviously if there's a fire, I'm sure elected members have probably heard this many a time. Could you do the honours for our guests? Would you mind awfully?
Yep, so there'll be no fire drill tonight and the fire alarm is allowed continuous ring. If the fire alarm rings, please leave the building promptly and calmly using the stairs next to the lift if possible. The fire escape in the council chamber should only be used as a last resort, and do not stop to gather personal belongings and do not use the lift. The evacuation point is at street level in the Knoll Road car park, and the assembly point is indicated by a green sign. Do not leave the assembly point until you are told it is safe to do so. And lastly, if you have reduced mobility and the fire alarm rings, please wait for my instruction and let me know.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Eddie. Very kind. So first thing I've got listed on the agenda this evening is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. From Councillor Louise Ashbury, Councillor Bob Rakes is subbing for her.
And I've received apologies for absence from Yin Pero as well. I probably haven't yet given them to you. My apologies there. Any other apologies from absence? Nope. Okay, so that moves us into item 2 of the agenda, which is Chair's announcements and welcome to guests. So, first of all, obviously welcome to James Bentley and his colleagues from Thames Water, who are joining us for an item further down the agenda. It's item number 6. If you'll forgive me, I've got a couple of Chair's announcements and bits and pieces to work through, but I'm sure we'll get through them pretty quickly to get to you. So, Eddie, do you want to take us through the revenue grants piece?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I haven't actually got too much to say on this, apart from a few Thursdays ago, the External Partnerships Select Committee met informally, virtually, to discuss the recommendations it was inclined to make in respect of revenue grants for the next financial year. I think we had a good, thorough discussion, and I think by consensus, there were a few recommendations which came out, which are sort of included in the supplement, which we all have.
Has everybody had a chance to see the supplement that's come out? Okay. Just as an update, Councillor Johnny Cope and I have spoken, and we wanted to just make it clear that when we had the discussions, we went with a 3-year recommendation for Citizens Advice Surrey Heath, which I think is not noted there. I think it was quite a fast-paced discussion at some point. So if we can just pop that into the recommendation, that would be fantastic. Cool. Is it okay as an amendment to pop that? Thank you, Eddie. Okay, I get to look up to the leader. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Councillor Sean MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to attend today as a member of the executive. I just had a question following reading that report and following some other correspondence across my desk, which is, could the 151 officer please confirm how much in total of the revenue grant budget was reduced by the previous Conservative-led administration from 2023 to 24 to 2024-25 in the most recently published medium-term financial strategy, which I think is 2023-2024 onwards. And perhaps he could also confirm the planned budget numbers by organisation for both years, and any justification that was provided at the time for the changes, specifically in the case of the Citizens Advice Bureau being impacted in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
I'm assuming, Nick Stevens, you're not the Section 151 officer or his deputy. So I think in the nicest possible way, could you A, take that away, and B, what's the requirement for answering questions? If you remind me, is it 5 working days? So I'm sure we can get that sorted within 5 working days. Yeah, a week. Do it through the norm, I think, is the right way to do it.
Would it be possible for a small follow-up, Chair?
Well, ordinarily, yes, you would be entitled to. So, yes, Leader.
Thank you. Would the Chair and the 151 officer agree with me that an uncaring Conservative-led administration planned budget cuts to essential services and was voted on by a number of members of the current chamber of that grouping, no doubt egged on in the borough and wider parish and county group, to organisations like the Citizens Advice Bureau supporting those most in need within Surrey Heath, is not a positive indicator of the financial health and vitality of the borough's finances when the medium-term financial strategy was set in February 2023.
I can't answer for the Section 151 officer, but for myself, I can certainly agree. My understanding from a number of people was it wasn't in the base budget, which is proving some degree of a frustration further into the process. And I'm assuming that's driven because our recommendations are going to come to executive. I think at that point, are we happy to agree the recommendations? Great. Thank you. Agreed unanimously. I think a point of clarification as well on a separate matter. So we've got 3 members of the executive here this evening, Councillor Sean MacDonald, Councillor Lisa Feenan-Cook and Councillor Morgan Rise, who've all been kind enough to ask my permission to attend this committee. Could we just note in the minutes that there's an open-ended invite for all members to attend this committee without seeking my permission? I think that's very important. I appreciate the Constitution says they should do, but I'm not entirely sure why. I'm not entirely sure the logic of it, so I'd just like in the minutes to have an open-ended invite for them. Okay, so that concludes Chair's announcements and welcome of guests. So if we can move on to minutes of the previous meeting, are you happy for me to sign them as a true and accurate record, or do you have any amendments that you'd like to raise? No, everyone's smiling at me. This is positive. Fantastic work there, Eddie. Thank you very much. The only thing I don't have today, apart from, well, I've got Lego, is I have no pen. So I will, Vice Chair, you're amazing. Thank you very much. So I can sign those as well. This is good news. Okay, so item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members have any items, anything they would like to declare in relation to this agenda? Lewis.
I'm sure we're all customers of Thames Water. Do we need to make a declaration of interest there?
I'm going to look to Eddie for his reaction. I think that's a very good question.
I'm going to say the answer is no, but thanks for bringing that to our attention, and I'll note it in the minutes. But it would be unpractical if everyone had a pecuniary interest and left the room.
Councillor Morgan Rise.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if it's required, but obviously myself and ward members of St Michael's and Watchet have met with Thames Water a number of times as the reason why we're here. So it's just a kind of a declaration that we have met with them in before this meeting.
I think that shows positive community engagement, Councillor Morgan Rise, which I think is an important duty of a councillor. Any other declarations of interest? No. Okay. So we'll move on to I've got item 5 next, which is public question time. You'll have to refresh my memory on that one.
Thanks, Chair. So in line with the Constitution, the deadline to receive questions by members of the public was the day after publication. So I think last Tuesday, I hadn't received anything.
Okay. Within reason, if committee permits, I'm always happy for people here, if they've got urgent questions, to ask them through the chair. I'm assuming if there are any, committee would be happy for me to permit that. I'm not seeing anyone indicating a question, so that's okay. Right, so we'll move on then to item number 6. Nick Stevens, are you going to introduce that one for me?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will do a very brief introduction. Firstly, my thanks go to James Bentley and colleagues for attending this evening, and also to Gavin McIntosh, who's our lead environmental health officer for environmental protection, for helping to prepare the report that's in front of you. The report is based on chronology of events that's been provided by our environmental health team, and also with support from David Harding, who is the customer and stakeholder manager at Thames Water. To summarise the report, raw sewage sludge was initially introduced into Camberley sewage treatment plant in February this year, with the tank being completely full, by March. I don't think we've ever received confirmation in terms of the total volume of sewage sludge that tank contains, but it's quite sizable. 6,000 cubic metres. Whilst odour suppression was in place, the understanding of officers is that it wasn't 24/7 and it didn't fully encompass the tank that the sewage sludge was held in, and that there were also ongoing challenges around maintenance and fueling issues with the odour suppression system as well. We, as a service, that is environmental health, didn't receive any complaints until June, and I think it's fair to say that councillors probably received far more complaints anecdotally and directly than we did as a service. Bear with me while I go through my notes. Initially, we were led to believe that it was localised issues with blockages in drainage and other bits and pieces, and then later it was confirmed in the middle of July by Thames Water that it was in relation to the holding tank and the large quantity of sewage sludge that was within that. Processing issues, as I understand it, meant that the sludge remained untreated until the beginning of August, with the treatment being fully completed and the tanks cleansed down by the 25th of August. But clearly during that time there was a huge amount of complaints that were received across Watchett's ward and St Michael's ward. The total population of both those wards is somewhere in the region of 11,600. And as you can appreciate, as the weather started to improve, people wanted to enjoy their gardens and open windows, and there was a notable level of complaint because of the odour that was caused. The report also makes reference to other issues around the escalation process for officers to log complaints. It's fair to say that the odour complaints that we received as a council fluctuated, and that was reliant on the odour suppression and whether it was working or not. So there were particular weekends where the odour was particularly problematic, and unfortunately the escalation process for officers to contact Thames Water to alert them for that weren't successful. Officers and councillors also encouraged Thames Water to ensure that they properly engaged with residents, and ultimately that culminated in a letter being sent out to residents that were within an affected area in the middle of August. Also referenced in the report are elements around the environmental permit and also the meeting that Councillor Rise has referenced between councillors, our MP and Thames Water on the 27th of September. I wasn't going to add any more than that, Chair. I don't know which way we would want to direct questions either.
Thank you, Nick. I thought it might be helpful from a committee perspective if James, you were able to set the scene a little bit. So I'd quite like us to hear from you around the business case for the decision to transfer the untreated sewage to Camberley this summer. So take us through that business case.
Thank you, Chair, councillors. First of all, let me say we didn't get everything right in that process, and we're not here to pretend that we did. At the end of the process, we managed to empty the tank treat the sludge, get it removed in the timescale that we committed to. And whilst that's good, I think the preceding few weeks and months, there's a lot that we have learned from this and a lot we could have done better. We should have communicated with you, elected officials, elected councillors and officers much earlier than we did. We should have put odour control in much quicker than we did. We should have, with your agreement and understanding and based on your advice, communicated with the residents around the area much sooner than we did. And for all of those things, I apologise unreservedly. We have adjusted our procedures to ensure that should this kind of event happen, it won't be at Camberley, because I think you're probably aware changes have been made to permits, but it may happen elsewhere if we're managing a lot of sludge and if our system requires us to store raw, untreated sludge elsewhere. We now have procedures that kick in that we have learnt from you. I don't take any comfort from the fact that we've learnt from the experience here, other than the fact that it is important that we did learn and that we have now adjusted those procedures. In terms of the business case for bringing the sludge here, I have two colleagues with me and I'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment. I am particularly grateful that Gary, who's an expert and one of the managers of our sludge business, knows much more about the practicalities and will be able to speak to that. But this wasn't something we had a choice over. We didn't weigh up a range of options and decide that this was the most favourable option. There was no cost-benefit analysis that it would be cheaper for us to bring the sludge here than put it elsewhere. We have been experiencing a very extreme sludge event where our system across the whole Thames Water estate, which is London, Home Counties, Thames Valley, was overloaded not only with liquid sludge but also with cake, which is the solid material that's formed when we process sludge and turn it in, remove a chunk of the water from it, and it becomes a more solid type of material. That system was overloaded in the liquid side and in the solid side for a host of reasons. And that left us with no choice but to put liquid sludge into what is referred to as strategic storage, which basically is a reserve tank. That is what happened here. And as I say, it wasn't something that we had a large range of options and we worked out the cheapest thing to do. It was the practical thing that we could do given the cards that we were dealt. My colleague can answer any questions over the technicalities of that if required. But I just want to assure you there was nothing in here that was around what's the cheapest way of doing this. This was just a matter of, and we have no choice in the sense of if we have excess liquid sludge that we can't treat through our normal process, it has to go somewhere and it clearly can't be just discharged into the environment. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have done it better. We should have done it a lot better. But just to be clear, it's not one of those things we have a choice. Do we get rid of this liquid sludge or not? We have to store it until we're able to treat it and dispose of it appropriately. I think that's the best answer, only answer I can really give you to your question about the business case as such, but happy to take any further questions.
So, in terms of the business case, obviously you brought the sludge here, so it came from somewhere. What would have been the business event if you'd not brought the sludge here?
I might ask you, Gary, if I may. Do you want to just introduce yourself? Look at that. You introduce yourself while I mop this up.
Everyone, Gary Combs, Lead Planning Manager, Thames Water. I have a team of 3 regional planning managers, one in Thames Valley, Home Counties North and Home Counties South, and their day-to-day job is managing the movement of raw sludge across the state from collection sites to reception sites, as we call them. Okay.
Should we just pause for 2 minutes just to mop that up? I think, in the nicest possible way.
I do apologise, colleague.
That's right, these things happen. We're all
that
human, it's absolutely fine. Gives you a breather.
Perhaps Hugh could introduce himself while we're
Yeah,
waiting.
sure. So, hello, I'm Hugh Thomas.
Do you want me to use it?
Hello. My name's Hugh Thomas. I'm the local engagement manager. My role at Thames is to facilitate the kind of engagement between the utility business, James, Gary, people like that, and elected members such as yourselves, and also with MPs such as, in this case, Mr. Gove. So I kind of previously set up some of the previous visits to Camberley Treatment Works and just trying to keep that communications channel open.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for helping clear up the, I guess it's a spill technically, isn't it?
The irony isn't lost on anyone.
I have to keep smiling through these things. It's always important to keep smiling. So the core nub of my next question was around what would happen if you'd not moved the sludge to Camberley. So that's what I'm keen to understand next. So if you can just talk me through what would have happened if you'd not moved it?
Yeah, so first of all, we didn't want to put sludge into strategic stores. What my team do is, so we move the sludge from a collection site to a reception site, as we call them, for processing the sludge. What they do on a daily basis, they manage the inventory and the criticality of each particular collection site, well, from a compliance point of view. What they did was, we had a digester outage at Hoggs Mill, so we had to prioritise Hoggs Mill collections because of part of the clean where we had to export 300 metres cube per day of sludge from that site. It got to the stage where we balanced that within our daily plan by also looking at the collection sites, inventory across the full estate, and it got to the stage where the inventory levels across the whole estate on 360 sewage treatment works was getting to a critical level. The risk that we had of not moving that sludge was potential pollutions to the watercourse and potentially 30 to 40 trucks parked up on the motorway, for example, in the middle of summer, which can potentially explode because of the gases within the sludge. Linking all that in together, we had to move that sludge very, very quickly, A, to protect site compliance, the watercourse, and potential dangers with our tankers. At that point, the only site that we had available was Camberley, where we identified there's two large sludge holding tanks, both hold 6,000 metres cube each. And at that point, we just had to move the sludge. If we didn't move the sludge, like I say, we'd have pollutions, trucks potentially exploding. And that's why we did it.
So to get to the nub of it, what you're telling me is if you'd not moved it, you'd have been faced potentially tankers exploding, which obviously from an HSE perspective,
from the gases produced from the sludge,
would potentially be landing into substantial road closures, possibly even deaths, and obviously there would be corporate manslaughter culpability risks as well from not taking that action.
I think we should be clear that the risk of explosion, we're not saying this is a very likely thing to happen. What we're saying is, as a minimum, there would have been a serious pollution incident had we not moved the sludge, because we process the sludge through our digesters, which is how energy is produced, and then the output from that is a different material that we can dispose of in different ways. When the digester that we were talking about wasn't available to process sludge, you have to move that sludge somewhere, you have to take it somewhere. And if you don't, you either have a significant pollution, and we all know we're already not performing well enough in pollutions, and this would have been very, very significant, or you store it in tankers, and as we're saying, this would have been many, many dozens of tankers, the road issues it would have caused, and the health and safety potential issue that it could have caused, just rules that out as any form of acceptable option. So you end up with, we have to store it until we can treat it. So that's why it ended up coming here. Had it not come here, either massive pollution problem or massive traffic problem and or health and safety issues associated with that.
So in terms of your risk levels on a risk register, whereabouts are we looking at these potential incidents? So normally we use sort of a 5x5 matrix, most sort of traditional risk registers. Are we in that red zone, presumably, in terms of risk?
Well, you would have been. I think we should be clear that when this kind of operational thing occurs, there is only one real viable option. The other two are just not viable. So we don't stop, pause, carry out a mathematical risk assessment. We do have the risk knowledge based on our assessment processes about a whole host of things. But I think it's important to understand that whilst the impact that storing this sludge had on the community is not acceptable, the impact we would have had on the environment or on traffic, and thereby environment as well as other things, or on health and safety risk, would have been very high. I don't know, Gary, if you've got a spreadsheet that says the box is red, the box is amber, or whatever. I mean,
So our part of our inventory management of raw sludge is we have operators attend our sites every day, give us live, up-to-date information on the tank levels of all the sites. We then RAG status that as red, amber, green. We have data based on site daily make, so I know what each particular site, what the sludge make of that site is per day. Then it calculates into the size of a tanker, 15, 20 or 30 metres cube tanker. Once I take a load from that site, that inventory then moves down to a safer level. But we had got the stage when our number of red sites, as I call them, was at that sort of that critical level. You combine that with a high risk report, which I receive on a Monday morning from our compliance and pollutions team. They provide that data to us. I then use that data based on my own inventory report, then work out each particular site's criticality for collection. It was getting to that stage when it was getting to the stage where we were at risk of not being able to collect these high risk sites, which then was going to potentially have the potential of a knock on to potential pollutions.
So were there other sites further away from residential areas that this untreated sewage could have been moved to? Fleet, for example. Where was Fleet on that RAG rating at the point in time the decision was made?
We export sludge from Fleet. We don't import into Fleet. So Fleet was not an option for us.
So Camberley was the only option at that point?
Yes, we have another strategic tank in Woking, which we are getting cleaned out at the moment, which again is there's 4 large strategic tanks there. It's at the very back of the works. There's no risk of smell complaints at Woking, but Woking was already full from issues we had 6 months before that. We had literally nowhere to go. And that's, my team had come to me and said, Gary, we need to move this sludge. I'm like, well, we have to move it somewhere. And Camberley at that point was our literally only option we had.
So if Camberley was the only option to prevent a substantial health and safety incident and potentially a substantial health and safety investigation, and also I think a very, very significant entry of raw sewage into watercourses, the cost presumably to the business would have been substantial. Talk to me about the potential costs. Are we talking thousands, tens of thousands, millions? Whereabouts are we looking on that scale?
Councillor, I don't have that information to hand, and I think it's important to understand that the cost of doing that was not part of the operational decision making. It was not a feasible option either to allow that extent of pollution or to allow that extent of traffic congestion. And frankly, if we'd have tied up 30 to 40 tankers storing this for a long period of time, then that just means more pollution incidents. So this is really just about, it's just not feasible or practical to do those things. We could do some theoretical calculations, but I don't think councillors should take away from what we're saying here that we were looking for the lower cost way of dealing with it. We were looking for a way to deal with it. There was only one practical way of dealing with it. If we could have done something else practically, we would have looked to have done so.
What I was trying to drive at was within the corporate world, obviously within the mem and arts of any company, you act in the shareholders' best interests. So you don't, for example, intend to cause a substantial sewage leak unless it's a commercially managed one. You don't intend, to cause an HSE incident. So what you did was you moved the sludge to Camberley. So the people that bore the cost of that were the residents of Camberley, substantially through the summer, through their loss of enjoyment. And I think it's understanding, the lost position that those residents were in. Because they're your customers, right? They pay you money.
Absolutely.
And they missed out substantially in the enjoyment of their summers. And I don't know if you've kind of had that kind of stinky raw sewage smell around your homes, but it's very different to being in a sewage treatment plant, which is your job. So I put it to you that you need to be considering a gesture of goodwill to those residents. And I think the starting point we should be considering is a year's complementary water bills. And let's start a positive discussion from then rather than nothing, because it's clearly saved Thames Water in material terms millions, if not tens of millions of pounds. So I think we need to start exploring that avenue there, because you're a commercial operation at the end of the day, and we know that because obviously, back end of 2022, you were able to pay nearly £500 million in dividends. That's a huge amount of money, £500 million. I'm sure the residents who were affected haven't paid £500 million in water rates. There's obviously some money sloshing around somewhere. I hear the poverty in the press and the news, but I also hear from Councillor Lisa Feenan-Cook, Councillor Morgan Rise and Councillor Jonathan Quinn about the nightmare for 4, 5, 6 months that their residents suffered, and that's not good enough. So to say they're not going to get anything is just frankly not good enough.
I understand your point. I certainly agree that the residents around the sewage treatment plant had to endure something for too long that was unacceptable. I agree. I know that, or we all know, that I have been asked to consider some form of financial acknowledgement, and you will be aware that I took that consideration to my leadership colleagues. I am not authorised, wasn't then, I'm not authorised now to say to you, I will reverse that decision. What I can do is faithfully report back to my colleagues what I've heard from you this evening, but I can't enter into a negotiation with you this evening on that basis.
I wonder then if there's a reason why Rachel Hambrook, who is a director on the board, declined to attend.
Rachel,
somewhat disappointing. And I think, we need the people that can make those decisions here. It was unambiguous from the paper that was written. So I feel a little bit like we've been misled by Thames Water here.
So Rachel's not a director. Rachel's the acting company secretary. And I'm not sure where we've misled you. I mean, so this is a matter for management. It's not a matter for board. So I have, as I said, shared with my leadership colleagues the views that were expressed to me at Camberley Sewage Treatment Plant by councillors and others, and that was a decision of leadership. So a board member would not make a management decision. It's within the authority limits, as it were, of the management. So the best that I can do on this issue is represent back to my colleagues what I'm hearing today, but I can't say that I am authorised today to enter into an agreement on that, and nor would a non-executive director if they were here. That is a management issue, and I will take it back to my management colleagues and present to them what you have said to me.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought a financial gesture was agreed.
No. So to be clear, councillors and others were very clear that was their expectation. And when we met, I think it was the meeting on the 27th of September, I said in that meeting that I was not authorised to confirm whether we could make any contribution, but that I would take that back to my colleagues. I went as far as to say, please don't commit any funds to any design or any planning work that you may be expecting us to compensate you for, because if and until I have authorisation, I wouldn't be able to compensate you. So please don't spend any money. Let me go and talk to my colleagues. That I did, and I wrote back with the decision that arose from that. I can appreciate why you may disagree with the decision, but we certainly didn't confirm that funding would be made available at any point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lisa Feenan-Cook, you indicated a little while ago, I'm so sorry for not coming to you sooner, my apologies.
That's no problem. Thank you, Chair. First of all, James and Hugh and Gary, it's nice to be able to welcome you here to Surrey Heath. We've met at Thames Water a number of times now, so it's nice to have you here in our building. There's a couple of things that well, there's lots of things, as you can imagine, that I've picked up on what you've said, but I will limit myself. I want to make the point that the communication that went out to residents, it didn't go out until August, when actually the whole event was almost over. And that's 6 months since the first delivery of sludge onto site. And to me, that's entirely unacceptable. Within that time, and I raised this with you, Hugh, there was some real concerning responses from the customer service team to residents, including one resident being told that they would no longer discuss the matter with her. And I know that you were going to go away and investigate that, but I haven't had any feedback on that, so I would be really interested to hear that. And I just think, in terms of trying to visualise how much 6,000 cubic metres is, Gary, how many tanker loads would that be?
Each tanker's 28 metres cubed.
Okay, that's enough. So loads and loads and loads.
Loads, yeah.
Okay, all right. So that first delivery came in February, and then deliveries continued from February to May. And now we know that there's been a change in the permit, and so Camberley can't be used again. And you've expressed concerns about what would have happened if you couldn't use Camberley in terms of pollution into the watercourses. What is going to happen going forward? So that's my first point. And then I would, if you'll forgive me, Chair, I would like to come back after the answer to talk about the compensation to the community.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Before Gary answers to a more technical matter there, can I just say we agree the communication was too late, far too late. It should have been at the start of the process, not the end of the process, and I've apologised for that, and it's not much comfort to those who suffered because of that, but we have amended our processes accordingly. But I completely agree with you, it was not acceptable.
Good.
The other thing I'd like to add to that is, following that feedback you gave, I did go to our customer centre and ask them to raise a point so that if anyone did phone in from any of those postcodes about odour, they had a script to know what was going on and they would properly understand that there is a genuine issue, so that people wouldn't be told this isn't a real thing, let's discontinue the conversation. But all the agents were properly briefed to know that there was an issue there. So that should have hopefully helped resolve the situation for residents and customers if they did phone up.
Yeah. So going forward, we have now identified a formal sort of sign-off process if we ever want to use strategic tanks. We have James Bentley's level sign-off, so full justification has to go to James Bentley. We've also identified various sites across the estate, for example, Easter Sewage Treatment Works, which is one of our major producing liquid sites, 300 metres cubed per day, which is 10 tanker loads. We've changed the process now with that site, where we've now turned it into a raw cake operation. So that's to protect our liquid inventory. So my planning managers now are dealing with 300 metres cubed, less liquid sludge to move every day. We're just going to move cake to THP to process. In terms of strategic stores, we are currently in the middle of emptying Woking strategic tanks. We have a centrifuge down there at the moment. So we're now looking long term on where this product is going. So we're turning liquid into cake. We've identified processes now where we are investing in THPs, So how we can increase our throughput to allow more raw cake to be processed, but also utilising sources outside of the estate to basically move our raw cake. So at the end of all this, like I said, we have a sign-off process now for using strategic tanks. We have reduced our liquid demand by turning liquid into cake in our larger volume sites, and we're investing in our THP sites plus additional capacity to treat this raw cake outside of Thames Water. So basically we're now my team's learnings from this event, we are now looking further and further ahead. Well, what is our liquid capacities? What is our cake capacities? Let's limit our liquid capacities, because liquid can go wrong very, very, very quickly because the sheer amount of volume they have to move every day. We move about 160 tanker loads per day, which at 28 metres cubed is a lot of sludge. Let's protect our liquid. Let's turn the liquid into cake. Let's look at our raw cake processing. How can we improve our THP capacity, for example, in Basingstoke, and increasing the TDS throughput to allow more cake to come through, but also identifying alternative sources of cake outside of Thames catchment to stop us then having to use places like Camberley to process the liquid sludge if issues do happen again in the future.
Just in case anybody's not sure what THP or TDS are,
Oh, yeah.
THP is just another process that we use, and TDS, we're talking about the total dry solids. So the difference between liquid and cake is you've taken a lot of the water out of the liquid to turn it into cake, and so you've got a smaller volume to be able to move around. So what we're doing on the sites that Gary was just talking about is improving that capability. So we've got less of this liquid stuff to have to move around. So that takes the pressure off when something goes wrong. If we still do need to use strategic storage, we've got the tanks that Gary was talking about that we're currently emptying. But we're now doing much better medium-term planning so that we're ready for such an event should it happen again.
Yep.
Thank you. So on my list, I've got Councillor Lisa Feenan-Cook wants to come back. Councillor Victoria Wheeler, I am so sorry. I saw your hand up, but I didn't see a camera on, so I wasn't sure if you were just waving at me. So hello and welcome. And then I've got Councillor Jonathan Quinn. So,
Chairman, just a minute. I'm a member of this committee, and nobody on the committee has just spoken. I'm a bit concerned. You didn't mention me as somebody being involved in this when you gave a list of people involved. None of the committee have had a chance to speak.
all of the committee are very welcome to put their hands up and speak. I'm sure committee members would be more than capable of raising their hand. Councillor Wilson, thank you very much. Any other committee member? He's put his hand up.
I thought you would have given priority, as you obviously have, bringing the outsiders into this discussion.
Are you putting your hand up to ask a question? Are you putting your hand up to ask a question?
Sorry?
Are you putting your hand up to ask a question?
I will ask a question.
So your hand has gone up now. Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Feenan-Cook.
Thank you. I wanted to come back on the points that you made with regard to, we didn't call it compensation, did we? We called it an acknowledgement to the community. And these notes that officers have kindly provided acknowledge that we had that discussion on the 27th of September, but we also had it in our previous meeting. And at the previous meeting, you were going to then come back to us with some further clarification on what would be on offer. And the indication was that it was going to be a financial contribution. And then when we came back on the 27th, I asked you for that figure and you said, well, I don't have the figure with me. But it was very, very clear. It was very, very clear that what we were aiming for and what you were in principle agreeing to was a financial contribution. And Hugh, we talked about, you and I across the table, we talked about what that might fund. We talked about facilities for young people, sport and play facilities to allow for compensation for the loss of the ability of children to play in their gardens over the summer period. It was really very, very clear. And then when you came back to us, that wasn't what was being offered at all. And the offer of a couple of days' labour on a community project that we can't fund because there's no funding for it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work for us, and it isn't reflective of the conversations that we had. So it is extremely disappointing, and I do feel that it is a complete backtrack on the conversations that we had. And colleagues may add to this, Murray and Jonathan and Morgan, like you were at the first one certainly, may wish to add to what I've said, but it is extremely disappointing. And given how poorly, as you admit yourself, how poorly those 11,000 people were treated over a period of 8 months, and certainly 6 months of high impact on them, I feel that there could be a greater gesture than a team of people for a day or two.
Could I?
Of course, James.
First of all, I don't know where to look. I'm sorry,
know, it's very difficult.
kind of talking to you, but to everybody.
Microphone's portable, so if you pick it up and face Lisa,
I've
that's
already
the best
knocked the water over once by doing that.
We'll trust you. We'll trust you.
So, I mean, first of all, if I could say, I understand that you're disappointed. I understand why you're disappointed. If I could also say, you were very clear.
Can I interrupt for a second? Lisa, could you pop your microphone on just for the people at home? On, yeah. And then it'll pick up audio.
I also agree that you and others, everybody there, were very clear of your expectation. So no disagreement there. After the first meeting, which I wasn't present at, there was a letter to Hugh, my colleague here, and Hugh replied in that letter, and that letter asked whether we would be able to make something, a financial contribution available. And the response was that we would consider that after the event was closed.
Can I just clarify, is the letter from the MP that you're referring to?
The letter from Hugh. Hugh.
From Hugh, okay, but we did discuss it.
I'm not, no, if I could be clear, I understand why you would be disappointed. I agree you were very clear in your expectation. I agree that we did not say no. There was the letter that Hugh wrote said we would look at that after the event was dealt with. I can see how it would be perfectly understandable that you would consider that meant that it's something that we would be positively considering. In the two meetings that I was present at, I didn't rule it out, and I did say that I need to seek authorisation. And I did say in the last meeting, please don't spend any money in case I don't get the authorisation.
That wasn't what you said.
Well, we have a very different recollection of the meeting, because I actually said, I remember the words that I said, please do not commit any money. Well, you can shake your head, Councillor, but please don't call me a liar about that.
I think if we're going to move into calling people liars or such, I think we need to be very careful, because I understand that the MP has a similar recollection to Councillor Feenan Cook. So I think there's certainly a discrepancy there.
I can accept a discrepancy. I'm just telling you the words that I believe that I said was that in case I can't compensate you, I don't want you to commit to funding that I may not be able to compensate you for. Now, I accept, I did not say I will not be able to compensate you. I accept that I said that I would take that to my colleagues to seek authorisation, but that I didn't have the authorisation. So that is my recollection. I firmly believe that's what I said. I also accept that in exchanges of this type, we can take different things away from the meeting. But I firmly believe, 100%, that was what I said. I also understand why councillors would have left the meeting expecting a more positive outcome. Not because I said that they would get one, but I wasn't clear that they wouldn't get one. So I understand the disappointment. I don't believe that I'm misled, but I could see why councillors may have expected a different outcome to what they got.
So the end point of that meeting on the 27th was really clear. It's really, really clear in my mind that the only question that you were going away with, both of you, I'm going to look at both of you because you were key in this conversation, was how much that acknowledgement to residents was going to be. You were going to come back with a figure. And that was the end point of that meeting. And that is absolutely the way it was. It's the recollection of the MP, it's the recollection of my councillor colleagues and others who were in the room.
It was very much, we will see what we can do, we will go back and find out what we can do.
Okay. I do feel that it is misleading. and we were misled through the process a number of times. I can raise that with you if you like in terms of the odour control system and how operational or not that was over various periods of time. And this, to me, feels like you are misleading the people in the chamber about the occurrences in that meeting on the 27th of September, and I find that incredibly disappointing.
I can't let that stand because I can understand why you're disappointed. As I've said, I can understand why you may have left that meeting feeling that I was going to come back with some form of positive answer. I know I said, please don't commit to any funding in case I can't compensate you. Now, that doesn't say I don't think I'm going to be able to, but that was my concern, and what I didn't want was you racking up a bill that I then didn't have an ability to pay. I thought I had made that clear. That was certainly my intent. I don't know what I can do to assure you that I have no intention of misleading the chamber, and I apologise for the fact that I should have been clearer in the meeting, that I should have used words perhaps that said there's a very high chance that I won't be able to fund this. But what I said was that I would seek authorisation, and I also said that I didn't want you to spend money in case I couldn't compensate you.
So is your feeling that a couple of days' labour from a few of the guys from the plant is sufficient compensation for the impact of residents over the summer period?
I don't think my feelings should be what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is there is a decision of the leadership of the company that I have faithfully represented your position to them, and I'm representing back to you the decision of the leadership of the company.
Okay, thank you.
My personal feelings are not relevant.
It's interesting, isn't it? Tens of millions of pounds by the looks were saved in that, and just for a few pennies, there's nothing in the bank.
Councillor, I can't accept the tens of millions of pounds thing.
Councillor Weaver.
Sorry, I am so bad with Zoom. Chair, if you want to go to the members of the committee first, so that they can have their say first. I appreciate my hand's been up for longer, but it is normal for them to come in first, I believe, and I'm very happy for them to do so.
Well, actually, the order of list I've got is yourself, then Jonathan Quinn, then Richard Wilson, then Murray Rowlands, then Liz Noble.
Okay,
So
I'm happy to come in, but obviously I'm not a member of the committee. I'm actually looking for reassurance. You're talking about the Woking treatment site. I want to make absolutely sure that that isn't the Chobham treatment site that you're talking about, which I know was discussed in a committee meeting with Woking Borough Council at the beginning of this year. We are receiving fairly regular discharges from the Chobham site into the River Bourne, and the improvement programme that you committed to it with Woking Borough Council doesn't seem to be progressing at potentially quite the same rate. So I am looking for assurance from you that Chobham will not be overflowing as a result of you needing to mitigate the loss of Camberley as a treatment site. And I think the most recent discharge into the River Bourne was the 18th. So I'm afraid it would appear that in every area, must try harder would be on your report card. I would also like to understand from you what the exceptional circumstances were that led to the issues that you've experienced this summer. And I'm very sorry, Chair, I probably should have declared a non-pecuniary interest right at the start, because like some of the ward members, my mother and sister do live within the catchment area that was impacted by the odour from the site in Camberley. So if I could understand, please, what the exceptional circumstances were and seek assurances from you that by moving from one location to another, the risk to Chobham and the River Bourne and the AOMBs that the River Bourne flow into and from won't be further impacted. Thank you.
You've danced a careful line, Councillor, Mr. Bentley.
So on the matter of the technical issues that led to the issue, I will ask Gary to deal with that. This is not Chobham, and also we should be clear that the movement of liquid sludge into a storage tank doesn't in any way affect the passage of water through a sewage treatment plant and therefore the discharge of water. So these are separated and separate streams. Where we talked before about the potential to pollute the watercourse would be if we weren't moving the sludge away from a site where it was being produced and it therefore ended up being discharged inappropriately. So A, no, it's not Chobham. B, no, the same problem wouldn't occur because the tanks Gary was talking about that we're currently preparing are in a much more remote area. And C, the storage of sludge, such as we're talking about in a tank, in no way has any bearing on the flow of water through the treatment process. So hopefully that clears that up. But Gary, perhaps the technical circumstances that led to the event in the first place.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, we had the digester outage at Hoggs Mill that was extended longer than what was originally planned. So we had the continued export 300 metres cube per day from that site into sites we call reception centres. So a reception centre in Thames Water is a site where we take sludge from collection site A and tip basically into one of these reception sites. We had a few process problems in and around the Chertsey, Mogden, Beddington regions, around that sort of hub, even then down towards Guildford and Farnham, which meant that our daily demand of 156 loads per day, we did not have enough reception capacity to deal with that demand, in addition to this surplus demand from Hoggs Mill. So what led us to having to use Camberley strategic tanks was the sheer volume from Hoggs Mill, plus our own daily demand, as what I call them, led to the inventory levels across all our 350 sewage treatment works rising to a critical level where we had to release the pressure as such from the system, and that is what led us then to have to use Camberley. But what I've said before is we've learned from all this, and we've now at the stage, like I said before, we're at the stage now where we're looking medium to long term how we can change sites from liquid process capacity to a cake product to then discharge in a THP site, plus looking outside of the whole Thames catchment where we can move this raw cake to. So we can only apologise it happened. It's never my team's intention to ever use Camberley, but we had no other option, literally no option but to use Camberley. So yeah, hopefully that explains why we had to use Camberley.
Just very briefly on cause, when we lose a digester, when a digester is not available to us, that's the liquid sludge would have been dealt with through that. So we're unable to process that sludge, and we already had the system full of liquid sludge. So when you lose the ability to process sludge on a site, you've got to take it to somewhere else, and those other places we would take it to were all overloaded already. So that was fundamentally the cause of the problem.
Hoggs Mill sounds a terribly nice name. Where is it?
London. One of our London sites.
Roughly where in London? Give us a clue.
Sort of west London, and around that area.
So Surbiton, basically. So that's an hour's drive away.
Essentially, yeah.
So Camberley were receiving the poo from Surbiton.
What we've got to really clear on is, from a transport logistics point of view, the imported sludge was not a tanker loading Hoggs Mill and taken down to Camberley. From a logistics point of view, to minimise the number of trucks on the road, we would have been importing Altons, Bordens, even up as far as Weybridges, bringing those sludges into here because it's closer to free up capacity in Chertsey and Mogden to then bring in like your Maidenheads and Windsors crossing there. So it cuts down the tanker distance basically to keep our trucks more efficient.
So we were pouring in poo from all over Hampshire and Surrey and London into Camberley, basically. Big logistics operation, poo all pouring in. My estimates was 214 tankers of poo, basically.
Yeah.
That's a lot of poo. A lot of poo. More than the little Lego poo there. So next person on the list. Jonathan, I'm so sorry to have kept you waiting there. Jonathan, you've been terribly patient.
Thank you, Chair.
I made a mistake with Victoria. It was very kind of you to sit with her.
No, thank you for giving me the chance to speak. So I think we've touched a little bit on the impact on residents, although I think the phrase enjoyment of gardens is underestimating the impact of the odour. It was so disgusting and strong over the summer that residents in my ward, well, they couldn't enjoy their gardens, but they couldn't even open their windows. They couldn't hang their washing outside for weeks during the summer. And I know residents who feared leaving their front door, and this was only the second summer since the peak of COVID. Many cancelled family gatherings because they didn't want their relatives to visit and experience the smell. They were embarrassed by it. They cancelled barbecues and events due to the impact of the smell. And it also had a distressing impact on people's mental health in my ward. And I know many instances of residents who were affected by it. So it's not simply the enjoyment of gardens and outdoor spaces. Now, I do want to come back to this matter of compensation, because I know Councillor Lisa Finan-Cook touched on this and spoke about it really, really well, actually. But we met with you as local councillors with the MP on the 27th of September, and we didn't ask for much. We didn't ask for the compensation that the chair of this committee was talking about. We thought that some money towards a community project, for example, a children's playground in St Michael's ward, because the odour stopped people spending time outdoors, could be a good real gesture from Thames Water. And we suggested this proposal to you at the meeting. And I was happy to see that there was a meeting of minds on the 27th of September. Thames Water, so you three sitting in front of me, agreed to the idea in principle. And we left the meeting with a very strong impression that the only outstanding matter was the exact amount that you would give to such a project. You referred to authorisation this evening, but when you spoke about authorisation in that meeting on the 27th, it was about the amount that Thames Water would give. It was not whether financial compensation would be given by Thames Water, it was about the amount of compensation. So rather than meet with us again, we then got an email on the 12th of October saying, actually, financial compensation, we're going back on that, we're reneging on that offer. And instead, we can only offer a day's volunteering of our staff. Now, do you think that going back on stuff like that, going back on meetings like that, going back on the words that have been said in meetings is the hallmark of a professional company?
I can't agree with the premise of the question, so I can't answer it in the way it's being asked. As I said, I fully understand.
You're always welcome to respond.
Well, no, I didn't write saying I'm reneging on what I said. I didn't renege on what I said. We have a difference of opinion over what I said. I think that's been traversed before. If I had, I wish with hindsight I had used language that was more clear about the fact, and that may be zero. But I know that I said, please don't spend any money until I can confirm to you that I would be able to compensate you. So I interpreted that as being clear. With the benefit of hindsight, I wasn't clear enough. But I certainly do not agree that I reneged on any agreement.
Could, for the benefit of Councillor Lisa Finan-Cook and Councillor Jonathan Quinn, could you just talk us through the no process within Thames Water? So you've obviously gone back to your colleagues in Thames Water. Let's talk us through who you spoke to and what discussions you had with them in relation to the compensation.
Well, I went back to, and I don't intend to go through he said, she said. I went back to my leadership colleagues, and I agree with part of what was said there, that I did not think it was an unreasonable proposition to be putting forward. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone back and put it forward. That doesn't mean that I had the authorisation to say yes to it. I thought it was a reasonable enough thing for me to ask my colleagues, do we think this is what we should be funding? So I asked for the view of my colleagues, and the view of the colleagues was that the money that the company had should all be put into improving the water and wastewater services that we need to do, particularly under these very constrained circumstances that we're working in at the moment. That is the long and short of it. I was clear that this was a, I think I used the word playground, was I think what I had said. I thought that was something that was worthy of our consideration, and it got our consideration. I don't think it's reasonable for me to say this person said yes, this person said no. What my view was, the bit of my view I'm prepared to put forward was that I thought that was a reasonable thing for us to consider. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put it forward. And I did. And the answer is, as I've said.
Was it a unanimous board decision that said no?
It wasn't a board decision. It was a management matter.
Management. So Alistair Corcoran, John Holland Kay, Guy Lambert.
John Holland Kay is a board member. Alistair.
So were any of these part of that decision process? I'm looking for who I need to invite next, because we need to talk to the person. What's the phrase you look for? We need to talk to the key decision maker. And obviously you're not the key decision maker. I think some of those key decision makers are hiding behind you at the moment. Now, I'm hoping that Michael Gove will be attending this committee in March. So perhaps we can have a key decision maker in March who, along with Councillor Lisa Feenan-Cook and Councillor Jonathan Quinn, can perhaps put their side of what happened. Because clearly there are some very different recollections. We've got, an MP that's saying something different to what you're saying. We've got at least two councillors here who've clearly got a different view, and I think we need the key decision maker here. So,
Three councillors, Chairman.
absolutely three.
That's right.
Well, I'm on your side, so there's no point heckling me. Yes, so there's no point heckling me. Thank you very much. So I think that key decision maker needs to come before me and the rest of this committee.
I would certainly go back and make that point on your behalf. That key decision maker, of course, can't rule on whether I'm lying or not. But that decision maker...
But that key decision maker needs to hear the case. Because, of course, this incident has saved Thames Water millions of pounds, and that's based on what you've described as what could have happened if you hadn't moved the sludge to Camberley. You obviously took a decision that there was a high risk of that happening, and we've heard that tonight in evidence.
No, Councillor, you've extracted from what I said, or extrapolated from what I said, a calculation of cost. Our decision-making was not about cost. We would have been reckless and irresponsible to pollute the environment with that much sludge. We would have been reckless and irresponsible to have caused a potential health and safety incident. I agree, it also wasn't acceptable that the sludge ended up causing so much distress, and all of the words you said I agree with. We're not looking to belittle it by saying they couldn't enjoy their outdoor space. I agree with every word you said about the impact that it had on them. I accept that that was not acceptable, but it was the only plausible option. You have extrapolated from that a calculation about money. I can't say that I agree with that. I haven't done the calculation because it wasn't actually relevant to our decision making. There was only one physical place we could have put that sludge.
Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Murray Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Thames Water reps for appearing before the committee. Due to the slight disruption earlier, I missed Gary and Hugh's second names. Maybe you could let me know what they are in a moment. I just want to ask about it's mentioned slightly in the report, and you mentioned it, Mr. Bentley, and Councillor Feenan-Cook was explicit about it, that you have lost the Environment Agency licence to import sewage into Camberley. Is that the correct way to look at it? And does that mean that cake could be imported into Camberley legally, or is that not included? And I guess my main question is, do you absolutely rule out appealing that removal of the licence and at some point in the future resuming imports of sewage to Camberley in any form? Thanks.
We're not seeking any change to the permit condition. It's a permit condition, correct me if I'm wrong, permit condition around what that tank can be used for. And that tank can't be used for what it was used for in this incident in the future. And we have no desire and no need to appeal that. As Gary was saying, the alternative tanks, should we get back into that situation, are in a location where they would have less impact. I think it is... it would be fair for councillors to understand when you're talking about those volumes of sludge, once you've put them somewhere, it takes an awful long time to get them out again. It's not like, we can put it there and then something crops up and say, oh, we'll just quickly empty that and use them for something. It doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, it takes a very long time. So that's why when we get into what we call a liquid sludge event, which we have been in for some time. Unfortunately, we're coming out the other side of it now. You end up with, there's no capacity in the system, and if something goes down, you have to go somewhere. We will not need to come here again, and we will not be seeking to come here again.
Okay, I mean, you said when you're in a liquid sludge event, and I think Gary said that the inventory had reached a critical level during this event. So if you were to have that event again, and the tanks that you say you would use now, they existed at the time of this event that couldn't be used for reasons. So do the tanks, strategic tanks, still exist in Camberley? And would you find yourself in a position where you didn't want to put the sludge in Camberley, but could you find yourself in a position next year?
No.
Say next, like March,
no,
in exactly the same position again? That's inconceivable.
No. So as Gary said, we have changed our planning and our practices and our procedures and our authorisations and so on. With the logistics management that we have in place, if we were in the situation where we had to go somewhere, we would go to the site that Gary was talking about before. We would not be coming here.
That site already existed?
Well, it existed, but it was full.
Right.
And as I said, you can't quickly empty these things because you have to process it to be able to put it somewhere.
And sorry, Chair, my final point. When you say you can't quickly empty these things, I mean 6,000 square metres, cubic metres of sewage is obviously massive. But is it true that you didn't start processing that until May? It had already been accumulating for months.
It had been accumulating for months, and there were reasons why we couldn't process it here. I think it's probably best if I throw to Gary. If you could explain why we were unable to process the liquid sludge. I'll start it and then he can finish it and correct it. But you need to, in thickening
Wilson,
it...
could you pop your mic? Sorry.
In thickening it, dewatering it to some degree to be able to take it away, you need to put that water that you take out of it somewhere, and we couldn't put it in the tank that we would have put it in because that was being used to deal with Camberley's own issues at that time. And so therefore we had to wait until we were in a position to be able to use that tank to put the extract, if you like, from the sludge into, so that we can take the cake away onto another site. Did I get that right or close to right?
Close.
Close to right.
Close, yeah.
Is there anything you need to correct?
Yeah, no, that's 100% correct. But to add on to that, when we put it, to empty out a strategic tank to put in the raw cake, we have to centrifuge it. So when we centrifuge it, as Jim's saying, the byproduct of that is centriate. So we need the second tank basically, because the ratio is 1 to 1. So 1 metres cube of liquid sludge turns into 1 metres cube of centriate. So we had to move from one tank into the next. As Jim's saying, with issues on site with Camberley as well, we had to use that second tank for their own digestive sludge. There's no odour from their digestive sludge, by the way, but we had to use that tank. But the reason why we couldn't centrifuge in March was because we didn't have the THP raw cake processing facilities within Thames. So we treat our raw cake in Basingstoke, Oxford and Crawley. But similar to liquid, they both have a maximum capacity that they can take each day. So when we combine in our digester cleaning program at the minute, where we may need temporary centrifuges, because if we take a digester out, we put a centrifuge in, instead of exporting liquid, we then process, we turn that into cake. That cake then has to go to the THP site. You combine that in with outages on our THP sites, but then added volume from a site like Camberley, we just couldn't deal with the raw cake. So since then, we have identified sources outside of the whole Thames catchment where I send trucks every day at the minute from our little cake collection sites. For example, Fleet is one of them. We can send that to a treatment facility outside of Thames. But we didn't have that capacity back in March. But now we've got plans in place for actually saying, well, out of our X demand per day of raw cake, we send an element of that outside of Thames. But we didn't have that capacity at the time, so I couldn't start the centrifuge in Camberley until I had that capacity.
So the initial delay is we couldn't, when you turn liquid raw sludge into raw cake, all you've done is taken moisture out of it. You've got to take that cake somewhere to deal with it. We didn't have anywhere to deal with it because that plant wasn't available. Later, when we could have done that and we could have got the centrifuge on site, you need to put the liquid byproduct of that centrifuge into another tank and then take the solid cake away, and that other tank by that stage was being used for the problems at Camberley that I was talking about. So 2 different processing problems, one off-site, one on-site, led to the delay before we could start processing. So I got it 2/3 right, I would say.
Yeah, thanks.
But,
I think it was basically a lack of capacity generally, because
Yes.
as you were saying, nearly everything was full
Yes.
across the whole system.
The lack of headroom in the system, so that if pressures build up and then things go down, that's when we got hit.
And Gary's described how you've now got extra capacity because you've got somewhere to take the cake out to. Okay.
Yes.
So and you're confident now you have the capacity, and in future this cannot occur again.
If we run out of ability to deal with the raw liquid sludge, we would be taking it to that other site that was not available to us at that time. And the fact that we've put in more ability to deal with cake means that we can do more processing anyway. But even if all fails, we've got tanks that we can now use that are in a better location that are not here.
Thank you.
Plus, the fact that cake outlets for us is more reliable than liquid reception. If we had a major problem on one of our sites, we have invested in temporary centrifuges, so I can put now a centrifuge into one of these sites, instead of exporting the liquid, put that to the machine, get me the raw cake, and then take the raw cake away. So using liquids, see, the thing is, I don't want to use liquid strategic stores because what goes in must come back out. So if I can deal with it on site, I can move then the raw cake away. So I don't have this overhanging problem. So yeah, if it answers it.
So on my list, I've got Councillor Murray Rowlands, Councillor Liz Noble, Councillor Kev Thompson and Councillor Morgan Wright. Have I missed anyone? Obviously, with Murray's concerns from earlier, have I missed any hands anywhere? Nope, I've got everyone. Nick, thank you for your help making sure. Murray, the floor's yours. Ask as many questions as you like. Enjoy.
I'm just wondering why it should be questions. I'm just wondering why it should be questions rather than the way the meeting's been conducted, in that you're taking observations from other groups like the.
Murray,
I was directly involved in the whole process. The first issue I'd take was that until I managed to get into the works, and I think probably talking about late July, the council was receiving explanations from Thames Water about what was going on, which in no way elaborated on what we've heard tonight. In other words, the council was kept almost completely in the dark, in as fact as it's well been spelt out, the residents were suffering quite completely. Only when I actually talked to not some of the executives that we've got here tonight, but to actual workers, a lot of the evidence of what was happening began to become available. And I'd make that point, and slowly the whole thing unravelled through that process. But as a question to Thames, why they were quite happy to go the official line, make what appeared to be reasonable explanations via emails to the council while the stink continued. And it wasn't until the logjam was broken that the reality of what was happening became available. Now, that doesn't seem to me a really principled way in which a company should actually operate. I mean, we've heard before the question about that meeting. I would think that Michael Gove, who was at the meeting, is quite used to hearing explanations and commitments from corporate bodies. And I'm quite convinced that Michael Gove, like most of us, went away from the meeting quite convinced that Thames were going to act in good faith and follow the promise to make some contribution towards what we were talking about would be a children's playground, a children's issue on the site. So all of the people went away quite convinced there would be a positive response from Thames. There wasn't any sort of qualification on that. They felt the mood was right for that to happen. And I'm sorry that the way Thames operate, that when that went forward to the senior members,
they took it upon themselves to, what we're hearing tonight, to torpedo the idea and come out against it. But my recollection, which is shared by the MP and the other councillors present, was we walked out of the meeting quite convinced that Thames would be making good on their promise to provide the money and the wherewithal for a children's playground.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions in there. Do you want to address them for Murray?
Could you just tell me just repeat, if you don't mind, so just what are the particular questions out of, I think we've dealt with what I think I said, what you think I said. I don't think I want to go there again, but what were the particular questions in there?
I suppose it's really that period which was quite a long period, probably 2-3 weeks, where it was clear something terrible was happening or the stink was coming. And it seemed to be that Thames were not prepared to engage with the community and really explain what was happening. It really, the explanation really had to be dredged out of them, or yourselves, before it actually became available. And there's of course an issue related to that, of how transparent and honest Thames were for the residents of St Michael's and for Watchetts, parts of Watchetts. And the answer must clearly be they weren't in any way transparent, or they didn't actually come clean on what was happening.
If I could, I think one of the changes that we've made is that, not that we're going to bring raw liquid sludge here again, but if we had to do something like this, or if we went back in time and said, we've now got these procedures in place, it wouldn't be able to happen without me having authorised it. And I first came to site to a meeting, first meeting I had with people in this room and with the MP was the 17th of August. There was a meeting before that on the 11th of August. If I'd have known in April, May, June what was going on, I would have been insisting that the kind of response that we eventually got round to giving would have been in place much earlier. So I agree that the level of communication was not appropriate or acceptable. And, you know, if I would have known what we were doing to the local residents, I would have been very much more involved much earlier in the process. We fixed that now so that it couldn't even happen without me having authorised it, so I would be involved up front. So I don't think I have any defence to claim. We were wrong. We should have been communicating much better, much more proactively. I can only apologise that we didn't.
Thank you. Councillor Liz Noble.
Thank you, Chair. I'm struggling to understand what the operational and causal factors were that led to the problem, led to such a large backlog. And coming out of that, number of questions. So one, how many customers are there within Thames Water? And so what proportion do our 11,600 residents represent in that?
I think there are about 15 million people that we serve.
Okay, so 11,600 isn't a large number in terms of that.
Not a large percentage, no.
So in terms then of the causal factors that led to the problem within Camberley, do I understand it correctly that there was a problem with a particular plant or a number of plants that led to the problem arising,
yes,
that then led to 11,600 people being affected for a long period of time out of your 15 million? Is that correct?
Yes, there were problems at processing plants that meant we couldn't process the sludge, and therefore we had to move the sludge. We couldn't move it to the places we would have normally moved it to, and so we had to move by a process of dealing with the logistics of moving different sludge to different places that maybe it wouldn't normally go there at that time, meant that 6,000 cubic metres came here when it ordinarily wouldn't have done, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I understand that. So my takeaway from the conversation or the discussions this evening has been that operationally, Thames Water have improved their procedures and their expected communications as a result of this, and that there have been learnings and operational improvements as a result of the summer's events. So, to my mind, our 11,600 residents affected over the course of the summer have contributed significantly to Thames Water's improvements in their systems, and operationally, that must be quite a big benefit to Thames Water, ultimately to the millions of customers that you have. But our 11,600 residents have enabled you as a business to make those operational improvements and therefore future savings.
I don't know that it wouldn't save us anything, but no, certainly this experience has enabled us to improve the way that we would run things should such a thing happen again. That is undeniably true, Councillor. Yes.
Okay, so my supplementary question then on that is, in business, if I have operational savings in my business, in my day job, if you like, I can quantify those. In your business, surely there should be a quantifiable element of those improvements in your operations, and surely leading out from that then, surely there should be some element of monetary compensation that could be afforded from those operational improvements and efficiencies that you'll be making going forward from the events of this summer. Surely then there should be some element of that saving that could be applied to the residents of the wards affected in order to that you as a business going forward are going to benefit from, but our residents did not benefit from. And the children in the two wards had their entire summer, their entire school holiday, where they couldn't enjoy that facility. But as a business, Thames Water is going to benefit from the operational efficiencies and the learnings that you had from this summer, whereas those children will not get their summer back.
I understand the argument you're making, Councillor. Just two things I would say, or three things I would say. One, acknowledge that, yes, we have improved our processes and therefore in future our practices would improve as a result of this. I don't think they would save us any money, but they would improve the way that we deal with the situation so that it should be less impactful going forward, should such a thing happen. As I say, I don't see from that it saves us money, but it certainly improves the way that we would work. On the other point about whether I agree, therefore there should be some financial benefit to the residents, I think I've explained I'm not authorised to negotiate on behalf of the company. I will certainly be reporting back to my colleagues with what I've heard this evening, and I will, as faithfully as I possibly can, portray what's been said, including the comments you've just made.
Thank you. I'd be very grateful if you would.
I've got Councillor Kevin Thompson next, and then I've got Councillor Morgan Rise.
Thank you, Chair.
And I've got Councillor Richard Wilson for a second bite of the cherry. And anyone else is welcome to second bite of the cherry if you need to.
Thank you. So I'd like to go back to a comment you made when we were talking about the fateful meeting, the management meeting, where the decision was taken not to offer the financial gesture, because as commented before, we are talking about a relatively modest financial gesture here. I know no number was ever mooted. You mentioned that you would rather, or not you, but your colleagues said they would rather invest that money on improvements, which is something we can all understand in the chamber here. We have to make decisions all the time about where we allocate our funds. I'm interested to know when we think about, you must have in your mind what that number would have looked like, what would have been acceptable based on the conversations you had before. What meaningful and material improvements that amount of money would make to your infrastructure. I'd like to ask the question of whether or not you're expecting to be profitable this year and paying dividends to your shareholders. Because unless you're a not-for-profit, then that feels like it's the shareholders that are winning where the residents are losing. And I'd also like to ask, do you think the decision may have been different had you been working in a more competitive industry?
So let me start with, if I could, let me start with the dividend issue. So a dividend hasn't been paid for 6 years. This year, the shareholders have put £500 million of equity into the company. And part of the reason for that is that over the period of this 5-year plan period, so 2020 to 2025, the spending over and above what the regulator fixes our prices based upon is more than that £500 million. So the company is spending much more than it's able to recover from customers just to keep the thing going. And far from having any money to pay out in dividends, shareholders have actually had to put £500 million additional equity in. In the business plan that we've put forward that's with Ofwat for consideration at the moment, which would cover 2025 to 2030, which has a very significant increased investment profile subject to their agreement, of course. There is an expectation going alongside that of very significant further equity injections from shareholders. So whilst I'm not the CFO and not in a position to forecast the financial performance of the business from a dividend payment point of view, I think those numbers kind of speak for themselves in terms of the shareholders have not had a dividend for 6 years. I find it hard to imagine if we're asking them to put billions of fresh equity in, even alongside a very significant increase in what we hope the regulators will allow us to invest recouped from customers' bills. So I think we can be clear that the shareholders haven't been profiting and certainly won't be profiting for a long time on this. I think your point is a reasonable one. Not to say any of the other points weren't reasonable, but your point is a reasonable one that this would not have been relative to the £500 million that I've just talked about or the very large investment we're hoping to make in the next business plan period. Of course, these numbers don't stack up in any way material against those. And as I have said before, I did think that whilst I'm not the decision maker, and I am a member of the executive team, and therefore I have some insight as to where the company stands on things, I thought this merited consideration. That's all I can really say about it. It merited consideration. I accept that colleagues who are present in the room believe I expressed that more positively, and you know, as I've said, with the benefit of hindsight, I wish I had been more definite or stronger, shall I say, on the possibility that that it wouldn't be received favourably when I discussed it with my colleagues. Beyond that, I think it's hard for me to comment. As for if we were in a more competitive environment, I think it's a little too hypothetical for me to be able to comment on, which may not be an answer you want to hear, but I think that's a difficult one for me to say. I do understand the premise of your question.
The reason I asked the question was not because it was not through any ideological issue with public, privatisation or anything like that. It was more, many of us, we all have other jobs. We're not councillors full time, and most of us work in commercial organisations where our customers, if we wrong our customers, there is a penalty. There is either a loss of business, a loss of reputation, or we have to take steps to avoid that. And the reason for my question is it feels like the people of Surrey Heath are falling victim to the fact that you don't really have any competition. You know what, they can't take their business elsewhere. So it was just a point I wanted to make.
If I could respond, I understand the point of your question, and I think it's very well put. What I would say is that while we're a monopoly, we're a regulated monopoly. There's no shortage of regulation in the water sector, I can assure you. There are elements of our service where the regulator dictates this is the compensation payable for certain things. So, for example, if there's a water supply interruption, there is a calculation that we have no choice over, it's automatically applied. So there are aspects of our service where the regulator dictates in lieu of you working, if you like. I'm not sure this is quite what they say, I'm interpreting, but in lieu of us working in a competitive environment, the regulator on behalf of customers says this would be fair compensation. So we are not in breach of any of those regulatory instruments, and those instruments exist on behalf of the customer so that the regulator can ensure that we are perhaps behaving in a way that you might do if you were in that other kind of environment. I'm probably extrapolating a little bit more than I should around there, but I'm trying to give a response to what you said that hopefully may be helpful. Certainly there are situations where the regulator has dictated this is the compensation payable under those kind of circumstances, and this is not one of those.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting to see that I think at September 2022 you had debts of, Thames Water had debts of 14.3 billion. And over 32 years, Thames Water had paid £7.2 billion worth of dividends, and shareholders are whinging about putting in £500 million, but they've had £7.2 billion out. And if you look at the state of the infrastructure, it does answer a few interesting questions.
I'm sorry to be picky. Councillor, I feel I must respond. I don't think I said that the shareholders are whinging about putting in £500 million. It was in response to, are they going to get a dividend? I made no comment as to whether they were whinging or complaining about that. It was a...
I didn't say you said they were whinging, my observation. Councillor Morgan-Rice.
Thank you, Chair. I have a series of questions. So I hope if
in the spirit of the Murray Rowlands rule that we should name it, you're very welcome.
Firstly, I'm going to start off by saying, just addressing your point earlier, no one's committed to spending any money. I think it was a line you kept saying earlier, don't spend any money. No money's been spent. And as Councillor Finan-Cook said earlier, there was an understanding of there was to be an acknowledgement of how much money was going to be profit. So I just want to say there's been no decisions on funding of anything because, and the disappointing thing of the offer of providing workforce is that there is no project that they can be assigned to. So it feels like a bit of we're getting out of doing anything. So that's my observation on that first point. Thankfully, in my opinion, the permit for Camberley's been revoked. And I imagine a part of the decision by the Environment Agency was the inability at Camberley to process the imported sludge. When I attended the site visit, that was a point that was made to me, is that essentially it was imported in, and the reason why it wasn't processed is because the site itself couldn't process it, and there had to be temporary machinery brought in to deal with it. So I imagine that's partly a reason why the permit was removed. So I also would like to know is how many of the Thames Water strategic sites are incapable of treating the imported sewage. I think that point's already been slightly addressed with the change to moving towards Cape rather than sludge. So that's my first question. My second question is just with regards to the strategic planning, is that how often does Thames Water have red sites like we had earlier this year, leading to the situation that happened in Camberley? Is that a regular occurrence, or was this a very unique situation? Moving on, why wasn't the odour suppression system introduced when the sludge was first imported into the site? That was in March, and the odour suppression was only introduced in its very early stage in June, and it wasn't until nearly mid-August where it was fully 24 hours. And even then, I questioned the efficiency of the odour suppression unit. Following on from that, in terms of the strategic site and the permit, obviously the permit's been removed, but for example, say we find ourselves in a situation that we're in today, and that we were early this year, that there's no capacity at Esher or the Woking sites. Could Camberley still be used? And what is the future of the tanks in Camberley? What is the intended use for them going forward? Because I wonder if all of a sudden you might just find in an emergency, as you say, in emergency, you have to make an emergency decision. And that might just be the only option you have. Could that still happen? And also just a question for James. Now that the new process is in place and you say that there has to be authorisation by yourself, if you were in the position, this is a hypothetical question, if you were in this position in January, February, would you have authorised it, what took place earlier this year, if the situation was still the same? There's also been recent discharges into the River Blackwater, and as Councillor Wheeler mentioned earlier, into the River Bourne. So I'm questioning, does the Camberley site remain efficient in its ability to handle the indigenous waste that it receives? Is it still fit for purpose, considering the amount of development we have in this area? Can it continue to cope? And as a further question from that, what's the plan to resolve the long-term structural problems that Thames Water has, especially in this region where we have the breakdown with the structural sites, which led to Camberley being used? What is the long-term plan to resolve those issues? Because I'm pretty sure you don't want to be in a situation where you're having to use emergency procedures on a day-to-day basis. As emergencies should be emergencies. So can you go through what the structural plans are? And that really goes on to my final question of the decision to not provide the compensation was prefaced because Thames Water believes all of its money should be put into improving its infrastructure. So what really is Thames Water doing? Because we've seen over only the last few weeks, there's been problems with the sewage system around the RMA, at Sainsbury's, at Watchmore Park, where sewage has been literally coming out of drains in the street. People have been walking through it. So it really is showing to me, and I think showing to Surrey Heath, a complete failure of Thames Water to be able to manage the monopoly that it has, as you mentioned earlier. So those are a number of questions. I'm happy to come back on any of them. But yes, I'll leave that there for now.
Thank you, Councillor. Chair, I'll pick off some of those that I think I'm best placed to answer.
I think rather than going through me, if you tic-tac through those, Morgan, that was a comprehensive list. So if you need reminders, James,
Okay,
there's no point me getting involved in that one directly.
I may need reminders as we go along. Let me pick off those that I can. And then I'll ask Gary to deal with some of the other issues. The one that was particularly addressed to me, if I was in this situation back then, that we had the procedure, that I had to make a decision, I think I've been very clear, there was no other choice. With the circumstances we were then faced with, there was no other choice. It is not plausible to say we could have just allowed this much sludge to run into rivers, or that we could have backed up roads with 30 to 40 tankers holding sludge in an unsafe way, and then that's 30 to 40 tankers that would not be available to move other sludge around that we need to. And so the whole logistical thing of that would have meant we would have had massive pollution issues in a lot of places. There literally was no other feasible option. So I would have had to very reluctantly said yes. However, I would have then been talking about how we're communicating it, where's the odour control system. Your question about why wasn't the odour control system put in place earlier is a question I asked myself when I was brought into this thing. As I said earlier, I was brought in somewhat late in the piece, and that's something that we've now corrected, that we would consider this to be something of a major incident, and therefore I would be in up front. So all I can say is the odour control system should have been introduced much earlier. The communication should have been in place much earlier. I would have reluctantly had to have said yes because there was no physical other solution. On the question about what is the structural plan, and you referred to excuse me, sewage coming up out of manholes and people walking through it. We've got a lot of work going on in Thames at the moment on blockages that give rise to polluting events or to flooding events. It could be an internal flood, it's called, if it goes inside someone's property, and an external flood if it goes somewhere outside of someone's property. Many of those, the biggest cause of those in the network is blockages in the network. We have targets from Ofwat that we have to meet on the blockage removal rate. So we have outperformed the Ofwat performance commitment, as it's called, 4 consecutive months, which may not sound like a lot, but I can promise you some months ago, or just over a year ago when I started this job, we were miles from complying with the blockages target. So we are improving our blockages performance, and we are now in line with the commitment that we've made to Ofwat around that. But we're starting from a place where we shouldn't be. We should be starting from a better place than we are. But we are now improving blockages in, as I say, in line with the commitments that we've given to Ofwat. The pollution events that result from the network as a result of blockages are also reducing. They're not yet reducing fast enough, but they are reducing where they weren't reducing before. So I think Thames Water, and this is as much in the Thames Valley and the home counties as it is in London, on the performance of the sewer network, we're starting from a place that's not good enough, but we are now improving at quite a reasonable rate. Got a hell of a lot further to go. On the question of what's the plan for the structure, the processing of sludge and the movement of sludge, I was at the Health, Safety and Environment Committee of the board today, where we were talking about the need for a systems view sludge plan for the business. As Gary's explanations and answers to questions this evening have highlighted, it's a pretty complex process, the whole logistics of how we, I think you said 160 tanker loads of liquid sludge we move around each day, and the estate that runs from most of London through to towards the Cotswolds and so on. We have called for, and we were discussing with the board today, with that subcommittee of the board, a comprehensive sludge logistics plan, sludge processing plan that takes a system view of the whole thing. So I don't have the answer to what is that strategic plan today, but we were discussing that at the Health, Safety and Environment Committee. So we agree with you on the need for that. We will be happy, should it suit the committee, to come back and brief you on that as that work develops. Are there any others you think I can answer before handing to Gary for the more technical ones? What hadn't I answered? And then we can work
I think just before we go to Gary, it's just, you've answered about the odour suppression and how you would have done it differently. But the question I asked was, why wasn't the odour suppression system brought in earlier? Was it just a failure of the decision maker at that time to not bring it in?
It was an oversight.
Okay.
An unacceptable oversight.
Fine. Okay. I think that's everything I've got for you. Gary, do you want me to go?
Yes.
So my first question for you was about the strategic site being able to not be able to process the sludge that was imported.
Yep.
How many of the other sites are unable to do that? So Woking, for example.
Yep.
Is Woking able to process the imported sludge that comes in?
No.
Which is why you've now moved to the cake system.
Yes.
Fine. Okay, that answers that question. Yeah. The next one was, how often, as you mentioned earlier, you've got your RAG system.
Yep.
And in earlier the year, you had a lot of reds, which led to Camley being used.
Yep.
How often are you in that situation? Is that a yearly thing? Is that a very rare thing to find?
I've been in Thames now for 6 years, doing this job for 4. We have never been in the situation that we were in my time in Thames. It was so unprecedented at the time, with the digester outage, with multiple reception site closures, with additional demand coming out from different sites. But in terms of the red site status, yes, the red sites were high, but each site's daily make. You might have a little site out in the Cotswolds. It could be red for about 2 weeks because the minimum sludge that site produces, I'm not going to send a tanker in until that is 90-95% full for efficiency reasons. But when you get down to this sort of area, around this area you've got the large 1,000 metre cube sludge holding tanks. They were literally 850 metres cubed, full of capacity. Not much headroom in all the tanks. at that stage, we just had to go to Camberley.
Yeah. So just following on from that point, is that a very rare thing to? Is that a rare situation
yes,
to be in?
Yes.
The question I'm trying to ask is, how often was Camberley used? Was it a very regular thing? Because is the system not coping with the amount of waste that it has to process? That's the real question.
Yeah.
I understand the small sites.
It wasn't. The system was overloaded due to the problems that we had. So the daily demand still has to move. If we don't move our daily demand, stocks go up, the inventory rises. Bring in the digester outage Hogs Mill exporting 10 Arctic tanker loads per day, 300 metres cubed, plus problems within our larger volume reception centres, for example, Chertsey, Mogden, Farnham, Guildford. If they are not open to treat the sludge, there's nowhere to move the sludge.
Okay.
So that's...
Yeah, fine. So are you expecting it to happen again next year in terms of the various sites to go down? I'm not expecting you to say yes, they're all going to collapse, but are we now moving into a type of situation where on a yearly basis the infrastructure that Thames Water has is becoming too old?
Now, what I can say is you can't predict what's going to happen in terms of unplanned outages. But the only thing that my team can predict is how we plan to move sludge again in the future. So, investment, like I said, in THP centres to allow more cake, to allow us to build a temporary centrifuge into a site such as Hogs Mill, to them just raw cake, get the raw cake taken away. We've invested in the temporary centrifuges for that. The sort of planning ahead of sites that we know we can import into, for example, Woking. If we have to import into Woking, there's this full sign-off process in place where, right, my team triggers to me as their escalation. I look at the overall picture, right, what can we do? Because we do not want to use any strategic tanks, because I don't want the wasted tankers travelling and having to take it back out again. It's the formal sign-off process with James, so we've now got a checklist together, right? If we have to use, for example, Woking, right, we need an event call must be raised with incident management. You have director of wastewater involved to sign off potential use of Woking, but they also got their customer stakeholder manager involved to make sure the customers are informed from the outset. Well, what do we need? Do we need a letter drop, social media updated? That didn't happen. So one thing I say is, what happened in Camberley has now triggered this process of moving forward. So like I said, the full sign-off process with everyone's involved before you actually say, right, before our first tanker arrives into Camberley, not Camberley, well, Woking, for example, everyone knows what's going on.
My next one is kind of about, it was two, but it's kind of about Camberley. So there was, as I mentioned, what's the plan with the strategic site, the tanks that exist in Camberley at the moment? Are they just going to remain empty? What's the long-term future plan for them? Are they just going to be used as kind of extra for Indigenous, etc.? And with the recent discharges into the River Blackwater, which only a couple of weeks ago during Storm Ciarán, just before Storm Ciarán, and there were also discharges, as Councillor Wheeler mentioned, into the River Bourne. Is the local infrastructure up to scratch and to be able to handle even the Indigenous waste coming in?
In terms of the tanks, I don't have the exact answer of what they're going to be used for. I believe they're potentially could be used for storm capacity, if excess stormwater coming into the site. Correct me if I'm wrong, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so, which means we 100% cannot import untreated raw sludge into Camberley.
So I don't think Gary can talk about the sewage treatment plants. Gary is our manager on the movement of sludge, which is generated by sewage treatment plants, but is not that process. So, yes, those tanks can't be used for this other purpose, A, because the permit won't allow, and B, the plan is that they would become storm tanks. That would help with alleviating the discharge problem that you talked about. But the sludge issue we're talking about is not related to the discharge thing, because it's a byproduct of the waste process rather than the core of it. The only way in which I guess you could say there's a linkage there is the fact that this tank can't now be used for that other purpose means that it can become storm capacity.
No, I understand that the recent discharges, not due to the tanks, but there have been recent discharges into the River Blackwater. And so there's obviously a reason why. And is the site at Camberley capable of handling the amount of Indigenous waste?
So, if you will, I'd like to take that on notice and give a proper answer to that. We came prepared, it's a very valid question, but we came prepared to talk about a set of events that we haven't prepared.
Absolutely, and I'm very happy under committee rules for the answer to be provided to Secretariat of the committee within 7 days. I totally understand. You can't necessarily answer every single question immediately. I understand that. Very happy for that to be taken away.
That was all of mine. I have some more, but I'll let someone else come in.
You're terribly kind, Councillor Rice. You've given way to Councillor Richard Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to come back to the answer you gave to Councillor Noble's question earlier about how this improvement that you're now going to see in your customer service throughout Thames Water to all of your customers doesn't actually save you money or make you money. And that's because customers can't leave. You can increase they have to just stay there. You can increase their bills, you can make them suffer from pollution, air pollution, as we've seen, and water pollution, and they can't leave. And management is not accountable to elected members of this council, and you've shown that by what you were saying earlier. You're not accountable to the MP either. Does all that come together to show the fatal problem really with privatised monopolies? The regulator, you mentioned the regulator earlier, but the regulator doesn't make you pay any compensation for all the suffering that you've caused all summer. So if water companies say we're publicly owned again, that would mean you would have to work, you'd have to be accountable to elected representatives, you would have to work in the interests of customers, and the events of this summer would lead to people losing their jobs. Would that be a better system for customers? Maybe not for yourselves?
On the one hand, I'm not prepared to get into a political discussion about whether water should be privatised or not. But let me just speak to the thing about the extent of accountability. So I've been the chief executive of a council-owned water company. I've been the chief executive of a state government-owned water company. One of those was in New Zealand, one of those was in Australia, and I can tell you water is no less controversial in either of those places than it is here. I would have met with the Finance Committee of the Finance and Strategy Committee, I think it was, of Auckland City Council when I was running their water utility on a quarterly basis and taken any questions from them, as I would do with you, and I'm very happy to come here as often as you want me to. I don't think, though, they had no directing capability. They owned us. We made what is referred to as a charitable payment to them. Some refer to it as a dividend, and it obviously has some similar properties to a dividend, but that all went charging, by and large, the same people that the council had responsibility for. We charged them for their water and wastewater services, and we returned a charitable payment to the council, which the council could use for other services. All I'm saying is, in that environment, the council had no more ability to direct me than this council would, or any other. I think there are 99 councils in the Thames Water area. I don't think it fundamentally changes the accountability thing. I don't think the fact that I disagree, or that my recollection of what I said at that meeting is different to councillors here or to the MP, means that I'm not accountable to them, or that I am accountable, or would be accountable to them if I agreed with them. I think I'm making myself accountable by turning up. I think I have not shied away from anything that's been put to me. I am incredibly apologetic for what we've done, and I should be, because it's very, very bad what we did. There's no shying away from that. I'm not sure what further accountability other models could have, and it's for others to judge whether other models are better. My job is simply to, within the model that we have, do the best job that I can for our customers and for the environment, and I'm very happy to come and make myself accountable to you on any basis that you wish me to.
Yeah, I appreciate you all being here. So if, when you were chief executive in Auckland, if Auckland had suffered from months of air pollution, meaning that people couldn't go outside, that it became known as a stinking city, people basically lost an entire summer of their lives. Would you have been sacked?
I think that's an impossible question for me to answer. It is. I understand the basis of your question, and if you think my performance warrants it, and I'm not trying to be facetious, please do take that up with my overseers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Richard Wilson. Councillor Victoria Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you'll indulge me a little bit. I'd just like to propose to this council that they make a proposal through to the executive or full council, whichever the correct methodology is, that we write to the governing body and we explain to them the limitations of the sanctions that they can enforce against Thames Water and other water companies, and that those sanctions should be extended to air pollution and land pollution as opposed to being without water and water pollution. I know that Councillor Morgan Rise has just raised the fact that there is sewage bubbling up in Camberley. We've had sewage flowing in Chobham out across neighbouring property and neighbouring land, not in the water, but certainly land contamination in our case. And I think it is evident from the attitude that has been exhibited by Thames Water this evening. Some may well feel that attitude shows a lack of consideration of the impact in Camberley this evening. And I think that fundamentally something needs to change. And I think that there is a body of opinion that would certainly support that. I think we should write to our MP. I see that the prospective MP is sitting in the room. I'm sure it is something that he would welcome and would support. I'm quite sure that our sitting MP would also support that. But I think fundamentally things need to change. And I think it would be good to get that ball rolling. Thank you.
Yes, of course you can come back.
Just a couple of things. One, I do apologize if my attitude is offensive or if there's something wrong in my attitude. I do apologise. All I can say is I am incredibly sorry for what we did. I think I've said that on several occasions. I am unable to negotiate on behalf of the company, as I have said, but I hope that that's not interpreted as my personal attitude to this thing is in any way flippant or uncaring or inconsiderate. But
if I can come in, my comments are absolutely not directed at you. I wasn't at the meeting earlier this year. My takeaway from that meeting was that you said something in good faith. The wider management team at Thames Water didn't feel it necessary or feel the pressure to follow through comments that you may or may not have made in good faith. So it's absolutely bigger than you. It's actually probably, in the nicest possible way, bigger than Thames Water. This is something that needs to change at a higher level to make sure that those governing bodies that oversee the way in which the water companies behave take into consideration other forms of pollution other than just loss of water and water going into our waterways. Both of those are completely abhorrent, but obviously those sanctions, certainly in my opinion, and I hope it's one that will be supported by this committee, those sanctions don't go far enough and don't protect our residents and our community from those events as they can happen. So I want to be absolutely clear, it's not a personal criticism in any way whatsoever, and it's a criticism beyond Thames Water. It's a fundamental fault with the way in which you're governed.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you, Councillor. If I could just on the other point about sanctions. In the regulatory system we had, I was talking about compensation when I responded to an earlier question. Penalties are very, very significant. So there are many performance commitments that if we do not meet the performance commitment that we have in place with Ofwat, we are a very significant penalty can be imposed on us. And without reeling off a whole list of them, it's available in our annual reports, and it would be very easy to find that information. But it wouldn't surprise you to know that the polluting of the watercourse, leakage performance, those things attract very significant penalties. I would also say, which is probably the one most related to your point, there is a score related to the customer experience, where there's a portion of that that is based on questions that are asked to customers who have had to have contact with us because of a matter, whatever it is. They're reporting a leak or they've got a service issue. And then there is a portion of that that is made up of the perception that people who haven't had to contact us have of us. So therefore our reputation is linked into this thing. There are very significant penalties imposed on water companies by the regulator around their reputation, around that reputational side of things. So that score, if you wanted to look it up, it's referred to as CMEX. We score poorly in that regard, and we have had significant penalties applied as a result of that. So there are sanctions beyond what I was saying in terms of compensation, and they are in the tens of millions.
I think air pollution is one in particular though, which is somewhat subjective. And I think maybe it would be important to have something which is introduced whereby that can be monitored. But I'm not a member of the committee, so Chair, it's over to you to take that forward or to ignore it at your will.
So you've set that as a challenge, haven't you, Councillor Victoria Wheeler? It's very tempting. We should catch up after this meeting or outside of this meeting. I like a challenge. I've got on my list Councillor Cliff Betton, and then Councillor Sean McDonald's camera's come on. With a hand up as well. Cliff Betton, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm of an age where I can remember the summer of 1976. That drought was a 1 in 100 year event. Because of climate change, which didn't exist in 1976, those sorts of things, instead of 1 in 100 years, become in one in 5 years, 1 in 10 years. This incident occurred in the past. It was exceptional. But what relation does it have to climate change in terms of production of wastewater, and what are Thames Water doing to make sure that the future is not going to be repeated, and that the system, like so many infrastructure systems in the UK, they're fine if nothing goes wrong. But as soon as you get a breakdown of a car on the M25, you get miles and miles of tailbacks. Is the system up to the task, and is it future-proof, or is it being future-proofed? That's my question.
Thank you for the question. I'm old enough to remember 1976. England played the West Indies, and it was the first Test match I ever went to at the Oval, and we got hammered, and that was kind of the start of my fanaticism with cricket. In terms of climate change, certainly climate change has a very significant impact on the waste system, but more from the water stream than the solid stream. So clearly, heavy rainfall and infiltration. So when we've had heavy rainfall, groundwater levels are high. Flows coming into sewage treatment plants are high for much longer than when the rainfall is falling, and that can be very difficult to manage all that influx of water in a way that doesn't lead to unacceptable discharges. So I think it's undeniable. Can I say I think it's undeniable? It is undeniable that climate change has an impact on the waste system. The fundamental issues around our sludge system, I think, are less to do with climate change and more to do with the condition of our assets. So is the system fit for purpose? Part of the investment in the business plan that I referred to earlier is to address the fact that we have a very significant asset deficit. We are not the only water company that's in that position. since privatisation, the rate of investment has gone up, but it hasn't gone up enough to keep pace with the very ageing assets that most water companies are dealing with. So I think the answer to your question is yes, I agree, climate change has an impact on the waste system. I think it's really about the water system more than the sludge system which we've been talking about today, but our asset deficit is clearly impacting on our ability to manage our sludge system. And this has grown over many decades, and it will take a long time to address the asset deficit in full, but that's part of what our next business plan for 25 to 30 is aiming to address.
Could you possibly give an indication of how many years? I mean, a business plan of 25, 30, when will that come online, if you see what I mean?
Well, the capital investments that are going to be made in that period, I think I'm right in saying it's between 4 and 5 billion of capital investment in water and wastewater assets as part of that business plan period. But when you're talking about very significant construction projects, you're talking about several years to get the plant designed, built and commissioned. Now, some of that work is obviously in design now, some of it is not. But even if we spent everything and had it all commissioned in the 5-year period, it's still not solving all of the asset deficit problems that we have. So I think it would be better, Chair, if I give a written response to that to do it justice. But I do want to be clear, the next business plan period will not solve all of our asset deficit problems. It will start to make a step in that direction.
Thank you.
Councillor Cliff Betton, are you comfy with that?
Yes, Chair, it's quite a complex question. It's quite a complex issue. A written response would be very welcome.
I think that's constructive. I think just to frame it, of course, if we frame it in the growth in Thames Water debt over the last 30 years, that's quite an important one to keep an eye on, because, of course, there's £14.3 billion worth of debt that's been racked up, of which £7.2 billion worth of that was spent on divvies. You know, it's just remembering you're talking about a £5 billion investment. There's a lot of money that hasn't been spent there, so it's just keeping one eye on that.
And we should be clear, the total investment in the 5-year period is 18.7 billion, I think. I was just talking about the capital investment in that period out of the subset of that 18.7, but I do understand your point.
Of course, that debt doesn't obviously include the interest payments on it, which of course are a millstone as well, which makes it an even bigger figure. I've got Councillor Sean MacDonald next. Have I missed anyone? I think that's the last speaker at the moment. Oh, I've got Councillor Morgan Rise as well. Okay, Councillor Sean MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I think mine links a little bit with Cliff's, Councillor Betton's. Firstly, as Leader of Council, thank you very much for coming and answering the Councillors' questions. I think our residents and ourselves appreciate it. I think it's fair to say that others have not been so honourable in this regard in putting themselves forward. So I think that is appreciated and should be noted. Personally, I remember, a bit like Cliff, maybe not quite so far back, my childhood summers in Surrey Heath. And therefore, I really feel for those residents and their children that lost their summer this year due to the actions of Thames Water that we've been discussing tonight. I think I sort of like to link back to Councillor Noble's point, the member for Bisley West End, who I think was alluding to the fact that investment had failed to be made over decades, and I think you've even touched on this yourself. A few minutes ago, it was stated that the outage of the system could not be predicted. I'd like to question that. As a chartered chemical engineer, I'm sure you would have a model based on mean time to failure, mean time to repair of various pieces of equipment, the volumes, the throughput, and the various other challenges you would get within the system, which would lead to a reliability calculation and a system availability outcome. So my specific question, which I'm happy if you wish to come back on it in due course, is what was the probability of this happening within the system at the time of the event? Going back to Cliff's point, was it 1 in 10, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 years, once a month? That you were prepared to accept, because you did accept it, because you inflicted it on the residents of Surrey Heath in particular wards. And what, if anything, has changed within your internal standards so that this doesn't happen to any other area of Surrey, or indeed London or other areas that you serve? So what is your new internal standard for a failure rate in terms of the probability of this happening?
Councillor, with your permission, I'll take you up on your offer of providing a response to you outside of the meeting. That was quite a meaty question that would take us quite a while to work through, and I'm not sure I've got all of the expertise at the table to do so, but we will, with your permission, come back in the allotted time.
No, that's fine, and thanks again for making the effort. It's certainly been a long and fruitful session from our residents' point of view. Thank you.
One question I have just before we go to Morgan Rise, can you confirm the names of the management team people? I don't necessarily have to confirm it to everyone in this meeting, but I'd like to know who they are so I can extend an invite to them for a future meeting. If you could drop me an email with those names and addresses so that Eddie and Nick can write to them and invite them along. I think it's very important that they come along as the key decision makers around this. Councillor Morgan Rise.
Thank you, Chair. Just two final questions for me. At the meeting that I attended, we were shown information with regards to the odour survey that's undertaken. And at that meeting, there was, I'm going to say, a commitment, hopefully that was a commitment, to undertake an odour survey after the event. So can I get an update on when that's due to finish, and also when the next regular odour survey is due to be completed? Because I think the question was asked at the time that the odour surveys are generally done in a time when the general smell is not as pronounced as it normally is. It's normally done in the colder months. When the summer months, there's always the general smell. So I'm just wondering, can we comment on is there going to be a change of when the odour survey is done? And my second question is, I'm certain that Thames Water, and I think you mentioned it earlier about customer service, that Thames Water takes customer service seriously. It wants its customers to be happy with the service that you're providing. And it really strikes me that the decision by the management over the compensation really strikes me as that they don't really care about the impact that it's been had on residents. I think you have been very clear about your position on it and that you're very sorry that it's happened, but the decision makers, it seems they're incredibly remote and that they don't really care about the 11,000 people that were affected over the summer. And that is the question I would ask you to ask them. It's a very difficult question, but I think it's, if the management do care about the impact this has had on residents, why are they not coming up with a solution which can rebuild trust in Thames Water, which would be that compensation, which has been identified we've discussed it in roundabout terms this evening, but I'm just very curious why they weren't willing to make that very small contribution when Thames Water is a massive organisation that has a very large budget, that it's almost would be irrelevant to the bottom line of Thames Water, but it would mean an incredible amount to the residents of Surrey Heath. So it strikes me as a bit uncaring, a bit remote, a bit, as Councillor Thompson mentioned earlier, they don't have to really worry about what we think of Thames Water because we're on the hook to them. Thank you.
With your permission, I'll take the second of those as a statement that I will faithfully reflect what I've heard to my colleagues. I would also like to say I am a member of that leadership team, and the nature of me appearing here and me being asked questions directed at me it's very hard to answer those and not appear that I'm distancing myself from my colleagues. I'm not. I am a part of that team, but I would also want it to be understood I care passionately about what we did wrong and making sure that we don't do such things again. As for the question about the odour survey, do you have the answer to that? No. Do you have the answer to that?
No, I believe it's going to be in the spring, but I will.
We will come back on that, and let's, you have my word. I hope that's still worth something in this chamber. You have my word that we will not be picking a time to make ourselves look good, and we'll confer with council and make sure that it works for you as well.
If I could, Chair, just on, I fully accept that there would be an odour survey because I assume you have to do them by law, I'm assuming. But there was a discussion, let's call it a discussion, at that meeting that I attended about doing an extraordinary odour survey because of the event. And I would like to know when that's going to be completed.
I simply don't have the answer to the question. I think I recall the same conversation. I'm not in any way denying that. Let us come back to you with the information. I don't know if it's been done. If it hasn't been done, it needs to be done, and it needs to be done at a time when it's going to be meaningful and not at a time that kind of we could then question whether it means anything because it's the temperatures are too cold or whatever. But we will come back in writing within the 7 days, I think you said.
Appreciate that. Any further comments or questions from the committee? So I just want to sort of sum up the cost savings that I've picked up from this evening, because I think it's quite important when we look around a gesture of goodwill. Obviously, a gesture of goodwill doesn't admit liability, but it does compensate residents for inconvenience. So I think there's savings to have been had on the essential plant by not introducing deodorising earlier. So there's a cost saving there, and also I don't believe it was running 24/7, so there's another cost saving there. So it'd be interesting to understand the value of that cost saving relative to compensation opportunities. I think the shipping of sludge to the Camberley sewage treatment plant obviously saved money on logistics elsewhere. As you've explained, it was a bump around of that sludge to save money. So I think there's also savings on potential prosecutions by the Environment Agency for sewage discharges into watercourses. I think it's fair to say we've heard descriptions as very, very significant pollution and massive pollution issues. So I think we need to understand the significance of what the inconvenience that Camberley's residents delivered in terms of value for money for Thames Water themselves. It's very important to understand that. I think the avoidance of a prosecution from the HSE for tanker incidents, obviously a tanker exploding would have been a pretty significant event, probably invoking sort of national government response on that and probably causing a meeting of COBRA to discuss that, because that could have triggered some quite substantial other risks. So what we're looking at the Camberley residents have mitigated are quite substantial. So I think setting that scene of cost savings as we walk up that scale, we can stop at any one of those, and I think they would deliver the cost savings in terms of a gesture of goodwill that would be worthy of the residents of Surrey Heath. As I say, my starting point is I think they should have a year's free water bills. So I think that's one to take back to the management team as a serious request, given they've lost their summer, and particularly so close to those poor children and the entire COVID situation when they were short of their summers then as well. It's pretty bad. So to have to sit at this meeting and hear that they get nothing, I think is a really, really sad place to have got to. So I think there are opportunities. Camberley residents have delivered a substantial cost saving to Thames Water. Now, I don't know how it gets booked in the accounts, but it's quite clear to the person on the street they've had that cost saving. And I think Councillor Lisa Feenan-Cook, Councillor Jonathan Quinn, obviously Councillor Kel Feenan-Cook, who's not here tonight, obviously Councillor Mary Rowlands and Councillor Morgan Rise, have fought tirelessly just to do the right thing for their residents. And we want Thames Water to join them in doing the right thing for their residents. So I think in terms of the recommendation, I think we formally ask for one of those decision makers to come before this committee. One of those decision makers who's got the ability to sign off on compensation and explain themselves. I think that's very, very important.
I won't rebut all the things you said about cost savings. You know, I don't agree with you that those are actual cost savings. I understand your point. I understand the argument.
And they are expenditures that were not incurred because, because of the inconvenience of Camberley residents.
I understand your point. I don't agree that they were costs that were avoided because of that. But I understand your point. Let's not argue back and forth on it. You make your point about wanting Thames Water to do something. I will faithfully relay that, including your request that someone else comes and appears.
So are we happy with that in terms of noting the report, but also requesting a key decision maker within Thames Water to come before this committee? Okay. And then finally, there was a request in terms of the leader writing to, I believe it was the regulator. Okay, so do we want that to be a recommendation from this committee to the leader, or do we want to take it to full council? Sorry? Be to the executive, I'm informed. Are we comfortable for that to go to the exec? I've got a thumbs up from I've got a thumbs up from the leader. This is good. Committee, it's your decision. Are you comfortable with that? Councillor Johnny Cope.
I am comfortable. Can I clarify what we're writing? What are we going to say?
I think that refers back to Councillor Victoria Wheeler's request. Do you want
Would you like me to reiterate it?
That would be a pleasure. We've had a lengthy and positive meeting, so I was deferring to Nick on the basis I didn't want to get it wrong for Councillor Cope. So thank you, Councillor Wheeler.
So basically that we ask the executive to write to Ofwat to our MP, asking them to consider pollution in the wider sense, because what some may feel has been very evident from this evening's meeting is that Thames Water have diverted, if I go back to your summing up, the risk of fines by increasing the pollution, the air pollution in Camberley. So I think that needs to be included so that Peter isn't robbed to pay Paul, so to speak, in environmental terms. Happy to write something to you, Chair, if that would be helpful.
That would be a pleasure. And I've got Councillor Sean MacDonald.
Yeah, so fully agree with Councillor Wheeler, something she probably wasn't expecting to hear today. Maybe just to add that the Secretary of State for the Environment, who I think is the person that looks after the regulatory support for this particular sector, which I believe we have done before, but we will certainly take soundings from interested members over what should be in that letter to maybe satisfy Councillor Johnny Cope's point, certainly at the group leaders level, if nothing else.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. I think we've pretty much come to the end of that item. Are there any final observations on the resolution of the committee? No? Okay. James, colleagues, thank you very much for your time this evening. I greatly appreciate it. I appreciate you've perhaps put your heads above the parapet, and it's been a constructive and a positive debate. So thank you very, very much for your time this evening. We greatly appreciate it. We do look forward to the key decision maker attending the meeting. It'll be the 12th of March 2024, if you can convey that date. And obviously, as soon as you possibly can, let Nick Stevens and Eddie Scott know their email addresses so we can formally invite them. The next bit we'll look through is the committee's work programme. You are very, very welcome to stay for the committee's work programme. If not, we can recommend some very nice hostelries around serving both soft drinks and caffeinated drinks. Thank you. So, committee, it's That was obviously a very popular item. We pretty much cleared the room, bar committee members now. So we're looking at the work programme for next year. So obviously this evening we received apologies from our local MP who was unable to attend to talk about finance. He was obviously at the COVID inquiry, and we fully understand that. So I'm hoping we can persuade him to come along to the March meeting. I think that would be very welcome. Obviously, there's a will we, won't we have a general election situation. So obviously, if we were having a general election, that would be inappropriate. So we wouldn't want to sort of put him in a compromising position, as it were. So we'd perhaps leave that until after a general election. Unfortunately, I've been unsuccessful, I'm afraid, in persuading Surrey County Council to come and talk to us about potholes. I feel like I've been given the runaround, to be honest. I've had lots of reasons why they can't come. I've even offered to move the meeting date, would you believe it? And when I offered to move the meeting date, they then said it was inappropriate for them to come. So I'm a little bit confused there, but hopefully we will get there. Nick, I'm trusting you with your sort of silver tongue skills. Don't tell them about Thames Water, because I only wanted them to present their plan for the future as opposed to look back to the past. I thought it was going to be a positive one. Is there anything else that committee would like to add to the work programme, amend or change? Councillor Liz Noble.
Thank you, Chair. I think you know what I'm going to say about the Frimley Integrated Care System in Surrey Heath Place. Can we extend that invitation, please, to Surrey Heartlands as well?
I think that's a jolly good idea. If I remember rightly, we had quite an in-depth discussion with a map. If I remember rightly, it was at our first meeting, wasn't it?
It was indeed.
And very clearly highlighted. I apologise for that omission. I will take personal responsibility for that, sort of, by looking towards my colleagues to add those extra words in. Thank you very much.
For the members that aren't aware, the Surrey Heartlands covers the villages, whereas Frimley covers some of the town. Some of the villages, rather.
Okay. Councillor Rowlands.
Yes, I'd like to suggest, and I know work is going on within the council, that this council might be rather unique, that in its objectives it has no mention of the arts and culture as part of its objectives. Now, I understand that work is actually going on to rectify that, and perhaps at our next meeting we could have a report on progress towards that, and perhaps bring in somebody, a statement from the Regional Arts Council or someone like that, to actually talk on the project of introducing arts and culture as an objective for the council.
I think that would be more led towards the executive, as I understand it. We're looking at scrutinising external partners. If they're not an existing external partner or delivering quantities of money services in the borough, I suspect that might be wider than our remit. I quite like it, actually. It sounds quite interesting, but perhaps as the leaders present virtually, he can take that away, and I'll leave that with him.
I mean, there is a group which calls itself the Arts Council that is only doing a narrow focus of distributing some grants and bursaries. I mean, I suppose to a limited extent you could call them in as a starting point in opening up this issue.
Let's take that away to consider it. Councillor Sean MacDonald.
So I respect Councillor Rowland's observation there. I think you're right. If we don't have an existing external partner to scrutinise, then it probably isn't this committee. Perhaps Mr. Stevens could just have a look at what the programme is for leisure to appear, leisure and the arts, or was it leisure and something else, to appear in front of P&F. Because that could be a place to take a bit of a holistic view as to provision.
If I can come in there, Chair. Thank you, Leader. We are looking at this as an annual plan topic for next year, which is a wider heritage and culture piece. We are aware, Councillor Rowlands, that there are some committees within the borough that are struggling in terms of cohort and funding. There is an aspiration that I know Suma Cubbin and Kaylee, the theatre manager, and Jill, the museum manager, have around a wider heritage and culture committee. So that will probably come forward as part of next year's annual plan. So we can either present that at P&F or it can come to executive.
Yeah, I'll accommodate it if it wants to go to executive, and I'm sure Sean will if it goes to P&F. Whatever's easiest.
Excellent. I like your strategy of getting things to P&F and the executive through External Partnership Select Committee. Well played. Are there any other... Councillor Johnny Cope.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one picking up on your reference to the MP and there being a general election. I note we've got the Police and Crime Commissioner down in March 2024, which is a couple of months before the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. Has that been considered, and are there any issues with that?
That is a mighty fine question. I'm guessing, looking to your skills, is that inside or outside of PERDA, as that's a fixed date as opposed to the parliamentary as a moving target?
I was trying to think of that, and I think that's going to be very slightly before PERDA, but I think it's certainly worth checking. I'm not sure.
I think that's a good question. Should we just double check that for peace of mind? I think that's a good one. So I think probably the safest bit for that is to look to Democratic Services who aren't here tonight. So if we come back to you, then that's probably safest. And
yeah, I'll come back to you. I think, like yourself, Councillor Cope, I think it might just fall outside, but yeah.
I have a sneaking suspicion of a discussion a while back about that, and I think it is technically outside. But we should always double check to keep our elected politicians safe from their own legislation. So any other comments or feedback on the work programme? Obviously, in the intervening period, it's a long way till March. So if you've got things you want on the work programme, we'll see what we can do to try and accommodate things. Councillor Murray Rowlands.
Are we being invited to talk to the objectives of some of these things, or is it we just note them?
Traditionally, the work programme's noted. I presume everyone's read them. So I presume, have you got any specifics you wanted to raise?
Just looking at the integrated care service, it just picks out one particular area of concern related to the care system, i.e. obesity. I mean, it obviously very important, but why is that particular aspect or particular problem picked out by itself? I mean, it's a naive question, perhaps, but I just wondered why it's just been, that one's been picked out.
Nick Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. I think that one is in there specifically because it's a joint piece of work between the Borough and Frimley ICB around developing what we're not calling an approach to obesity anymore. It's an approach to healthy weight. So it's a piece of work that will come forward in December for consultation with health colleagues and then get more widely distributed. So that is probably the reason why that one in particular has been referenced in the plan.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions? Thankfully, Cliff Betton's rubber band can't fire off and hit us because he's behind a screen. Okay, with no further questions or observations, happy with the work programme to move forward as is? Agreed? Fantastic. Close the meeting. Thank you very, very much, everyone. Thank you for those robust questions for Thames Water. Well done.